I'll never forget the moment I walked outside that Tuesday morning and saw them. 3 grown adults with measuring tapes, clipboards, and vindictive smiles, standing around MY car in MY driveway. The HOA board president, Margaret Kellerman, looked up at me with those cold, calculating eyes and said the words that would haunt me for months. This vehicle is parked illegally on HOA property. You have 24 hours to remove it, or we'll have it towed at your expense. I stared at her, coffee mug still in my hand, trying to process what I was hearing. This was my driveway, the driveway I'd been parking in for 3 years, the driveway that came with a house I'd saved every penny to buy. "Ma'am, this is my property," I said, my voice shaking with disbelief. She smiled that predatory smile that would become all too familiar. "Actually, according to our latest survey, your driveway extends 6 inches onto HOA common area. That makes your entire vehicle illegally parked." 6 inches. 6 inches was about to destroy my life, tear apart my family, and teach me that sometimes the only way to deal with bullies is to become something they never saw coming. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you how a simple parking dispute turned into the most expensive, most satisfying revenge I've ever executed. And, trust me, by the end of this story, you'll understand why I don't regret spending $2 million to teach Margaret Kellerman and her cronies a lesson they'll never forget. My name is David Chun, and 3 years ago, I thought I was living the American dream. I just landed my dream job as a software engineer at a tech startup, and my wife Sarah was pregnant with our first child. We'd been saving for years, scraping together every dollar we could, dreaming of the day we could finally buy our own home. When we found 1247 Maple Ridge Drive in the Willowbrook Commons subdivision, it felt like destiny. The house was perfect, a modest 3-bedroom colonial with a small yard, updated kitchen, and best of all, a 2-car driveway that meant we'd never have to worry about street parking again. The neighborhood was quiet, family-friendly, with tree-lined streets and well-maintained homes. The HOA seemed like a bonus at first. The dues were reasonable at $150 a month, and the amenities included a community pool, playground, and well-maintained common areas. During our house tour, our real estate agent, Janet, spoke glowingly about how the HOA kept property values high and maintained neighborhood standards. "You'll love it here," she assured us as we signed the papers. "The HOA is very professional and reasonable. They just want to keep the neighborhood looking nice." I remember the day we moved in. Sarah was 7 months pregnant, glowing with excitement as we carried boxes into our new home. Our neighbors seemed friendly. The Johnsons next door brought us homemade cookies, and the retired couple across the street, the Wilsons, offered to help with our lawnmower when they saw me struggling with the old one that came with the house. Our daughter Emma was born 2 months later, and those first months in Willowbrook Commons were pure bliss. I'd work from my home office, listening to Sarah humming lullabies in the nursery. In the evenings, we'd take Emma for walks around the neighborhood, admiring the beautifully landscaped yards and chatting with neighbors. The HOA seemed like a distant, benign presence. We'd get the occasional newsletter reminding residents about pool hours or upcoming community events. There were a few minor rule reminders. Keep your garbage cans out of sight. Maintain your lawn. No unauthorized modifications to home exteriors, but nothing that seemed unreasonable or intrusive. I should have paid more attention to the stories I heard whispered at the community pool. Mrs. Wilson mentioned that the previous HOA board had been much more reasonable before Margaret Kellerman was elected president 2 years ago. The Johnsons casually mentioned that they'd been fined for having their Halloween decorations up 2 days too long, according to some obscure HOA rule. But I dismissed these as isolated incidents. After all, every neighborhood has a few overzealous rule followers, right? I was busy with work, Sarah was adjusting to life as a new mom, and we were just happy to be homeowners. We paid our HOA dues on time, kept our lawn trimmed, and assumed we were model residents. Looking back, I realized those first peaceful months were just the calm before the storm. Margaret and her board were watching, waiting, measuring literally, measuring, for any opportunity to flex their power. And unfortunately for them, they picked the wrong family to mess with. The motorcycle was my stress reliever, a modest 300 cubic centimeters, bike I'd bought used and rode occasionally on weekends. It was completely legal, registered, insured, and barely took up any space. More importantly, it wasn't violating any city ordinances. I checked when I bought it, but apparently, the HOA had different rules. I called the HOA management company that afternoon, reaching a bored-sounding woman named Patricia. "Yes, Mr. Chun, I see the violation here," she said in a monotone voice. "Motorcycles are considered recreational vehicles under our covenants." "But it's my transportation," I protested. "I ride it to work sometimes." "It's not recreational, it's practical." "I understand your frustration, sir, but the rules are the rules. You can appeal the decision at the next board meeting if you'd like." The next board meeting was 3 weeks away. The fine would double every week until compliance. I had no choice but to move the motorcycle to a storage unit across town, costing me an extra $80 a month. That should have been the end of it. I should have learned my lesson and kept my head down. But Margaret Kellerman was just getting started. 2 weeks later, another orange envelope. This time, the violation was for unapproved exterior modifications. The offense: a small Ring doorbell I'd installed to keep an eye on package deliveries while Sarah was home alone with Emma. Electronic devices visible from the street require Architectural Review Board approval, the notice stated. Fine, $75. I was furious. A doorbell, a safety device to protect my family, required approval from a committee of self-appointed neighborhood dictators. But I needed that doorbell. We'd had several package thefts in the area, and Sarah felt safer knowing she could see who was at the door. This time, I decided to attend the board meeting. The meeting was held in the community center conference room, a sterile space with fluorescent lighting and cheap folding chairs. About 15 residents were scattered around the room, most looking as frustrated as I felt. At the front table sat the 5-member HOA board, with Margaret Kellerman commanding the center position like a judge presiding over her court. Margaret was exactly what you'd picture when you think power-hungry HOA president. A woman in her early 60s with perfectly coiffed silver hair, expensive reading glasses, and a tailored blazer that screamed, "I have nothing better to do than make your life miserable." She surveyed the room with a self-satisfied air of someone who'd finally found a kingdom small enough for her to rule. When my turn came to speak, I stood up and tried to keep my voice calm and reasonable. "I'm here to appeal the violation notice for my doorbell. This is a security device that helps protect my family. It's not a decoration or modification, it's a safety necessity." Margaret barely looked up from her papers. "Mr. Chun, the Architectural Review Board exists for a reason. Any visible modifications to home exteriors must be approved in advance. No exceptions." "But it's just a doorbell," I said, my voice rising despite my best efforts. "It's smaller than the original doorbell. How could it possibly affect property values or neighborhood aesthetics?" Board member Kevin Hartwell, a thin man with a perpetual sneer, leaned forward. "The rules don't make exceptions based on your personal convenience, Mr. Chen. If we allowed everyone to install whatever they wanted without approval, this neighborhood would look like a circus." I felt my face flush with anger, but Sarah grabbed my arm, reminding me to stay calm. "Fine," I said through gritted teeth. "What's the process for architectural review?" Margaret smiled that cold smile. "Submit your application with detailed plans, photos, and specifications. The review fee is $200, and the process takes 4-6 weeks. Of course, you'll need to remove the unauthorized device immediately and can't reinstall it until approval is granted." So let me get this straight. I had to pay $200 and wait over a month for permission to install a doorbell that was smaller and less visible than the original. And in the meantime, I had to remove the safety device that protected my family. That night, Sarah and I sat at our kitchen table, going through our HOA covenants. With a fine-tooth comb, what we discovered was terrifying. The document was 47 pages of increasingly specific and arbitrary rules that gave the board nearly unlimited power to fine residents for virtually anything. Some highlights included: no vehicles parked in driveways for more than 72 consecutive hours, meaning you couldn't go on vacation without moving your car. Grass height must be maintained between 2.5 and 3.5 inches, requiring weekly measurements. No exterior Christmas decorations before December 1st or after January 7th. Garage doors must remain closed except when actively entering or exiting. No visible storage of any kind, including bicycles, gardening tools, or sports equipment. Architectural approval required for any change visible from the street, including new mailboxes, house numbers, light fixtures, or even different colored curtains. "This is insane," Sarah whispered, bouncing Emma on her lap. "We basically don't own our house. We're just renting it from the HOA." But the worst was yet to come. The harassment escalated throughout the winter. Every week brought a new violation notice for increasingly petty infractions. Our trash can was visible from the street for 30 minutes after pickup, despite being blown over by wind. Sarah's car was improperly positioned in our driveway, 6 inches too far to the left. Our Christmas wreath was deemed oversized and not in keeping with neighborhood aesthetics. Each violation came with fines ranging from $50 to $200. Each fine doubled every 2 weeks if not paid. By February, we owed the HOA over $1,800 in accumulated fines and late fees. But the breaking point came on that Tuesday morning in March when I found Margaret and her cronies measuring my driveway. 6. My HOA tried to steal my parking spot, so I bought the whole street. The recent survey shows your driveway encroaches 6 inches onto HOA common property, Margaret explained, her voice dripping with false concern. Therefore, any vehicle parked in your driveway is technically parked on HOA property without permission. I stared at her, speechless. This is my driveway. It was here when I bought the house. The deed clearly shows the property boundaries. Board member Susan Walsh, a sharp-faced woman with a clipboard permanently attached to her hand, stepped forward. The original survey was apparently inaccurate. We've had the entire neighborhood resurveyed by a certified professional. Your driveway definitely encroaches onto common area. "Show me the survey," I demanded. Margaret's smile widened. "All HOA records are available for review by appointment. You can schedule a time with our management company to review the documentation. In the meantime, you need to move your vehicles immediately." I looked around at my neighbors, hoping someone would speak up about this obvious harassment, but the street was empty except for old Mr. Peterson, who was watching from his window with a mix of sympathy and fear that he might be next. That evening, I called a surveyor to conduct an independent assessment of my property. The results came back a week later. My driveway was entirely within my property boundaries. The HOA's certified survey was either wrong or fabricated. But when I presented this evidence at the next board meeting, Margaret dismissed it with a wave of her hand. Our survey was conducted by a licensed professional specifically contracted by the HOA, she stated. Your survey, while I'm sure well-intentioned, doesn't supersede our official documentation. Then let's get a third-party survey, I suggested. Let the city planning office verify the boundaries. Kevin Hartwell laughed. "Mr. Chun, the city has no jurisdiction over HOA property disputes. This is a private community matter, governed by our covenants and bylaws. The board's decision is final." I sat there, stunned by the naked abuse of power. They had created their own little kingdom where they could make up rules, fabricate evidence, and impose their will on anyone who dared to resist. But what really broke my heart was watching the effect on my family. Sarah stopped taking Emma for walks around the neighborhood because she couldn't bear the stress of potentially violating some unknown rule. We kept our curtains closed and lived like prisoners in our own home. Emma, now 9 months old, seemed to sense the tension. She was fussier, less settled, as if the toxic atmosphere in our home was affecting even her. One night in April, I found Sarah crying at the kitchen table, surrounded by HOA violation notices and bills. "I can't take this anymore, David," she sobbed. "They're trying to break us. Every day there's something new. I'm afraid to go outside. I'm afraid to let Emma play in our own yard because what if she makes too much noise? What if her toys are visible from the street?" That's when I knew something had to change. The HOA had taken our dream home and turned it into a nightmare. They'd stolen our peace, our security, and our happiness. But they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd messed with a software engineer who knew how to research, analyze data, and solve complex problems. It was time to fight back. The next morning, I did something I should have done months earlier. I started digging. Real digging. The kind of deep dive research that had made me successful in my career. I began by requesting every single HOA document available, meeting minutes, financial records, vendor contracts, board member information, and most importantly, the complete history of property surveys in Willowbrook Commons. What I discovered over the next several weeks was a pattern of corruption, financial mismanagement, and abuse of power that went far beyond petty harassment. 8. My HOA tried to steal my parking spot, so I bought the whole street. First, the financial records. Margaret Kellerman had been systematically awarding contracts to companies owned by her friends and family members. The landscaping contract, worth $50,000 annually, awarded to her brother-in-law's company without competitive bidding. The pool maintenance contract, her nephew's business. The certified survey that supposedly showed my driveway encroaching on common property, conducted by her husband's surveying company, a company that wasn't even licensed to operate in our county. But the real smoking gun was hidden in the board meeting minutes from 2 years ago, just after Margaret was elected president. There was a discussion about problem residents and strategies for encouraging voluntary compliance through escalating enforcement actions. In plain English, they were targeting homeowners they didn't like and looking for ways to force them out. My name appeared on that list. So did the Johnsons, the Wilsons, and several other families who had dared to question board decisions or express any independence. I also discovered that Margaret and her board were paying themselves consulting fees from HOA funds, thousands of dollars per month for property management services that were already covered by the management company. We paid separately, but perhaps most infuriating was the revelation that the HOA had accumulated over $400,000 in a reserve fund, money that was supposed to be used for major repairs and improvements. Instead, Margaret had been using it like her personal slush fund, paying for expensive research trips to other HOA communities, vacations, premium catering for board meetings, and even a new car for the HOA president's official transportation needs. Armed with this evidence, I knew I had 3 options: surrender and move away, fight through the legal system, or get creative. The legal route would take years and cost tens of thousands in attorney fees, with no guarantee of success. Moving would mean letting them win and losing the home we'd worked so hard to buy. So I chose option 3. I was going to beat them at their own game. The first step was understanding exactly how much power the HOA really had. I spent hours researching property law, HOA governance, and municipal regulations. What I found was fascinating. While HOAs have significant authority within their communities, that authority is limited by state law and local ordinances. More importantly, I discovered that our HOA's power was based entirely on their control of the common areas and their ability to place liens on properties for unpaid fines. They were essentially a small-scale government, but like any government, they could be challenged, changed, or even eliminated. But changing the system from within would require getting elected to the board. which seemed impossible given that Margaret controlled the election process and had a core group of supporters who benefited from her corruption. That's when I had an idea that was either brilliant or completely insane. I started researching the property ownership records for our entire neighborhood. Willowbrook Commons consisted of 127 homes on 15 streets, with various common areas including the pool, playground, and several small parks. But what caught my attention was the ownership structure of the roads themselves. In many newer subdivisions, the roads are owned by the municipality and maintained with tax revenue. But Willowbrook Commons was different. It was developed in the 1990s under a different set of regulations. The roads were private property, owned collectively by the HOA and maintained through our monthly dues. That's when the plan began to form. I spent the next month quietly reaching out to my fellow problem residents. The Johnsons were facing foreclosure due to accumulated HOA fines for infractions, like having a basketball hoop in their driveway and planting unapproved flowers in their front yard. The Wilsons were being harassed for having a non-conforming mailbox that had been installed by the home's previous owner 15 years ago. Young couple Tyler and Jessica were being fined for having their garage door open while unloading groceries, violating the aesthetic standards policy. One by one, I shared my research and my plan. Not the full plan, that was too risky, but enough to gauge their interest in fighting back. The response was overwhelming. Nearly 30 families had been targeted by Margaret's regime, and they were all ready to take action. 10. My HOA tried to steal my parking spot, so I bought the whole street. But we needed legal firepower. I reached out to several attorneys who specialized in HOA law, eventually finding one who was intrigued by our situation. Amanda Torres was a sharp, experienced lawyer who had successfully challenged abusive HOAs before. "Your case is particularly interesting," she told me during our first meeting. "The financial improprieties alone could result in criminal charges. But what really has my attention is the property survey fraud. If we can prove they fabricated evidence to support their harassment campaign, we're looking at serious legal consequences for the entire board." Amanda agreed to represent our group on a contingency basis, meaning we wouldn't pay attorney fees unless we won. But she warned me that legal action would take time, and in the meantime, Margaret would likely escalate her attacks. She was right. 2 days after I filed our first legal challenge, I came home to find a tow truck in my driveway. Margaret stood beside it, practically glowing with satisfaction. "Your vehicles are being removed for illegal parking on HOA property," she announced. "As we discussed, your driveway encroaches on common area, making any parking a violation of community rules." I handed her the court injunction Amanda had prepared. "Actually, you can't touch my cars until the property boundary dispute is resolved. And if you proceed with this tow, you'll be in violation of a court order." Margaret's face went red as she read the document. She dismissed the tow truck driver and stormed off, but not before leaving me with a parting threat. "You have no idea what you've started, Mr. Chun. This community has ways of dealing with troublemakers." She was right about one thing. I had no idea what I'd started, but it was much bigger than she imagined. That weekend, I made a phone call that would change everything. "Sterling Property Group, this is Michael Brennan." 11. My HOA tried to steal my parking spot, so I bought the whole street. "Mr. Brennan, my name is David Chun. I have a business proposition that might interest you." Michael Brennan was a real estate developer I'd researched extensively, a man known for buying distressed properties and turning them into profitable ventures. More importantly, he had a reputation for being absolutely ruthless when it came to property rights and zoning law. "I'm listening," he said. "How would you feel about owning an entire subdivision in Willowbrook Commons? All the roads, common areas, and control structures of a 127-home community." There was a long pause. "That's unusual. What's the catch?" I explained the situation, the corrupt HOA, the harassment campaign, the fabricated surveys, and most importantly, the legal vulnerabilities in the HOA's property ownership structure. So you're telling me, Michael said slowly, that this HOA owns millions of dollars in real estate assets, has significant cash reserves, but is facing potential criminal charges and massive civil liability. That's exactly what I'm telling you. And I think there's a way to acquire those assets for pennies on the dollar. Michael was intrigued enough to meet in person. 3 days later, we sat in his downtown office, surrounded by architectural plans and property development models. Here's what I'm thinking, I said, spreading out my research. The HOA is essentially a small corporation that owns property and provides services. But they've violated their fiduciary duties, mismanaged funds, and potentially committed fraud that makes them vulnerable to a hostile takeover. Michael leaned forward. Explain. Every homeowner in Willowbrook Commons owns a share of the HOA through their property ownership. Those shares come with voting rights for board elections and major decisions. But here's the interesting part. There's nothing in the covenants that prevent someone from buying multiple properties to accumulate voting shares. 12. My HOA tried to steal my parking spot, so I bought the whole street. You want me to buy houses just to control the HOA? Better than that. The HOA is about to face massive legal judgments. When that happens, they'll be forced to either raise dues dramatically or sell assets to cover their liabilities. Either way, property values will plummet and some homeowners will be forced to sell. I pulled out a spreadsheet showing my calculations. Based on comparable sales and the average income levels in our neighborhood, I estimate that 1520 properties will go on the market at distressed prices over the next 12 months. If you could acquire just 2530 properties, you'd control enough voting shares to completely restructure the HOA. Michael studied the numbers. And then what? What's my exit strategy? That's the beautiful part. Once you control the HOA, you dissolve it, transfer the roads to the city, sell the common areas to developers, eliminate the monthly dues and restrictive covenants. Property values will skyrocket because you've just freed 127 homes from HOA tyranny. And you're cut. I don't want money. I want Margaret Kellerman and her cronies to lose everything they've stolen from this community. I want them to watch their little kingdom crumble, and I want to live in peace in the home I worked so hard to buy. Michael was quiet for a long moment, running calculations in his head. Finally, smiled. Mr. Chun, I think we can do business. The next phase of the plan moved quickly. Michael's company started quietly, purchasing properties in Willowbrook Commons, not enough to raise suspicions, but steadily accumulating voting shares. Meanwhile, Amanda pushed forward with our legal challenges, uncovering more evidence of financial fraud and abuse of power. The breakthrough came in July, when Amanda obtained a court order allowing us to audit the HOA's financial records with a forensic accountant. What we found was even worse than I'd suspected. Margaret hadn't just been paying herself consulting fees, she'd been systematically embezzling money for 3 years. The pool renovation that supposedly cost $85,000, she'd pocketed $40,000 of it. The emergency roof repairs on the community center, completely fabricated. The money went straight into her personal accounts. In total, she'd stolen over $200,000 from the Community Reserve Fund. But the most damning evidence was a series of emails we found on the HOA's computer server. Margaret and her board had been discussing specific strategies for harassing problem residents into moving. They'd even maintained a target list with detailed plans for each family. The email about my family read, Chin family, father works from home, mother stays home with infant, high stress, recent home buyers, target, vehicle violations, and exterior modifications. Goal, for sale within 12 months through escalating fines and harassment. When Amanda presented this evidence to the district attorney, criminal charges were filed within 48 hours. Margaret, Kevin, and Susan were arrested for embezzlement, fraud, and conspiracy. The The local news covered the story extensively, painting a picture of a suburban HOA gone rogue. But the real satisfaction came 3 weeks later at the emergency HOA meeting, called to address the crisis. The community center was packed. Nearly every homeowner in Willowbrook Commons was there, many of them hearing about the extent of the corruption for the first time. Margaret's supporters, the handful of residents who had benefited from her cronyism, sat in the back, looking shell-shocked. Amanda stood at the front of the room, presenting the forensic audit results. The numbers were staggering. Not only had Margaret stolen over $200,000, but her mismanagement had left the HOA liable for tens of thousands in contractor penalties, legal fees, and potential civil judgments. The bottom line, Amanda announced, is that this HOA is functionally bankrupt. The reserve fund has been depleted, and the organization faces potential liability exceeding $500,000. Without immediate action, every homeowner in this community will face special assessments that could reach $4,000 per household. The room erupted in angry voices. People were shouting questions, demanding answers, calling for immediate action. That's when Michael Brennan stood up. "Ladies and gentlemen, I have a solution." He walked to the front of the room with the confidence of someone who held all the cards, which, as it turned out, he did. "My company, Sterling Property Group, has been quietly acquiring distressed properties in this community over the past several months. As of today, we own 31 homes in Willowbrook Commons, which gives us controlling interest in this HOA." The room went silent. You could hear a pin drop. "Effective immediately, I'm exercising our voting rights to dissolve this HOA entirely. We will transfer the roads to the city for public maintenance, sell the common areas to recoup stolen funds for distribution to affected homeowners, and eliminate all covenants and restrictions." The silence was broken by a wave of confused murmurs. People didn't understand what this meant. "In plain English," Michael continued, "there will be no more HOA, no more monthly dues, no more violation notices, no more architectural review boards. You will own your homes free and clear, with the same property rights as any other homeowner in the city." The murmurs turned to cheers. People were hugging, crying, applauding. I looked around the room and saw the faces of my neighbors, families who had been living in fear, walking on eggshells, afraid to live freely in their own homes. For the first time in years, they looked hopeful. But the best moment came when Margaret's husband, Richard Kellerman, stood up and demanded to know how this was legal. Michael smiled. "It's completely legal, Mr. Kellerman. Your wife and her board created this situation through their criminal actions. We're simply exercising our property rights to solve the problem they created. You can't just buy your way into our community and destroy everything we've built," Richard protested. I stood up, facing him across the crowded room. "Actually, he can. And the beauty of it is that your wife made it possible. Every time she harassed a family into foreclosure, every time her corruption forced someone to sell their home at a loss, she was creating the opportunity for someone else to buy in. She destroyed this community through greed and abuse of power. We're just cleaning up the mess." Richard sat down, defeated. There was nothing he could say. His wife's crimes had destroyed not just individual families, but the entire power structure she'd worked so hard to build. The formal vote was a formality. With Michael's controlling interest and the overwhelming support of the remaining homeowners, the motion to dissolve the HOA passed 9-8-3. The only dissenting votes came from Margaret's remaining cronies on the board. 6 months later, I'm sitting in my backyard, watching Emma take her first wobbling steps across the grass. Sarah is laughing, encouraging our daughter as she toddles toward the vegetable garden we planted in what used to be the architecturally controlled front yard. The transformation of Willowbrook Commons has been remarkable. Without the oppressive rules and constant threat of fines, the neighborhood has come alive. Children play in the streets. Neighbors chat over fence lines. People have painted their houses in colors they actually like, planted gardens they actually want, and decorated for holidays, without fear of violation notices. The Johnson family kept their home and started a small business selling custom mailboxes, ironically, the same non-conforming style that had gotten the Wilsons in trouble. Tyler and Jessica converted their garage into a home gym and leave the door open whenever they want. The Wilsons planted a beautiful flower garden that attracts butterflies and would have violated at least 12 HOA regulations. Property values have indeed increased, just as Michael predicted. When you remove the threat of arbitrary fines and oppressive restrictions, homes become more valuable, not less. People want to live in freedom, not fear. Michael made good on his promise to distribute recovered funds to affected homeowners. After selling the common areas to developers and recovering what money could be traced, every family that had been targeted by Margaret's harassment campaign received compensation. It wasn't enough to cover all the stress and legal fees, but it was something. Margaret herself is facing 3 to 5 years in federal prison for mail fraud and embezzlement. Kevin and Susan pled guilty to lesser charges and received probation, but they've both moved away from the neighborhood. Richard Kellerman sold their house for significantly less than he'd hoped, apparently. Being married to a convicted felon doesn't help your property values. But the real victory isn't financial. It's the peace. I can park my motorcycle in my driveway. Sarah can hang laundry outside if she wants to. Emma can play in our yard without worry that her toys might violate some aesthetic standard. We can live like normal people in our own home. Sometimes I wonder if I went too far. Spending $2 million to defeat an HOA seems extreme, even by my standards. But then I remember Sarah crying at the kitchen table, surrounded by violation notices. I remember the fear in our neighbors' eyes. I remember the arrogance in Margaret's voice when she told me that rules were rules and the board's decision was final. The truth is, this was never really about parking spaces or doorbell regulations. It was about power. Who has it? How they use it? And what happens when decent people decide they've had enough. Margaret and her cronies thought they could build a little kingdom where they were the absolute rulers. They thought they could abuse and intimidate people with no consequences. They thought that homeowners were powerless against the almighty HOA. They were wrong. The lesson here isn't that you need millions of dollars to fight HOA abuse. Michael's investment made the solution faster and more dramatic, but the real weapons were research, legal knowledge, and community organizing. The evidence of corruption was there all along. It just took someone willing to dig for it. If you're dealing with an abusive HOA, start documenting everything. Request financial records. Research your board members' backgrounds. Connect with other affected homeowners. Find a good attorney who specializes in HOA law. Most importantly, remember that HOAs derive their power from homeowner apathy. When people start paying attention and demanding accountability, that power can disappear quickly. As I write this, Emma is napping in her crib, and Sarah is humming while she cooks dinner. The afternoon sun is streaming through our kitchen window, illuminating the life we've built in this house we fought so hard to keep. Margaret Kellerman tried to steal our parking spot, but in the end, we bought the whole street. And more importantly, we bought our freedom. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even. It's getting everything they tried to take from you, and then some. The HOA thought they owned us. They forgot that in America, we own them. And that made all the difference.